"Did you like the house I left you?" my son asked, standing in the doorway with a confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. I looked at him, then at the two uniformed men behind him holding a clipboard and a folded notice. "What house?" I replied quietly. "I sold it yesterday." My daughter-in-law froze beside him, her manicured hand tightening around her purse strap. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind pushed lightly against the half-open front door, carrying in the faint scent of freshly cut grass from a yard that was no longer mine. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're listening from, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my own family." It was supposed to be a simple afternoon. The kind where you pack slowly, fold your life into cardboard boxes, and try not to think too hard about what you're leaving behind. I had already sealed the last box, 32 years of memories reduced to labels written in careful, steady handwriting. Kitchen. Bedroom. Documents. Each word felt smaller than what it held. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet I used to enjoy with my late husband on Sunday mornings, but the kind that echoes, like something has already been taken from you, and the walls know it before you do. When I heard the knock, I knew it wasn't a neighbor. Neighbors don't knock like that, sharp, official, final. I opened the door to find my son standing there, dressed like he had somewhere better to be. Behind him, the officers. And behind them, my daughter-in-law, wearing that same polite smile she'd perfected over the years. The one that never quite reached her eyes. "Mom," he said, as if this were a casual visit. "We need to move things along. The paperwork's been filed. It's time." Time. Such a simple word. But the way he said it, it sounded like a deadline I had somehow missed. I stepped back and let them in. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I simply nodded, the same way I used to when my son was a boy explaining something he barely understood himself. Only this time, I understood everything. The officers stepped inside, their presence filling the space in a way that felt heavier than any furniture I had already packed away. My daughter-in-law walked past me as if she owned the place, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floors I had polished for decades. She glanced around, not with nostalgia, but with assessment. Measuring. Calculating. "You've packed already," she said, her voice light, almost impressed. "I've had time," I replied. And that was true. More time than they realized. My son avoided looking at me directly. Instead, he focused on the boxes stacked neatly by the door. "This will make things easier," he muttered, as if convenience could soften what he was doing. I watched him closely then, searching for something familiar, some trace of the boy who used to run through this house with scraped knees and laughter echoing off these same walls. But all I saw was a man who had already decided I no longer belonged here. The officer cleared his throat, unfolding the document in his hands. "Ma'am, we're here to oversee the eviction process. If you could gather any remaining personal belongings, I'm finished," I said calmly. That seemed to catch them off guard. People expect resistance. Tears. Pleading. But I had none left to give. Not today. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms, her expression tightening slightly. "Well, that's efficient," she said. But there was something else beneath her tone, something uneasy, like she had expected more of a fight. Because people like her don't just want your home. They want to watch you lose it. I picked up my handbag from the kitchen counter, the same counter where I had once packed my son's school lunches, where I had stood for hours cooking meals no one seemed to remember anymore. My fingers brushed against the surface for just a second longer than necessary. Not out of sadness. Out of recognition. Every inch of this house had been earned. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every late night spent worrying about bills, it had all been mine. Mine and my husband's. And yet here they stood, ready to take it as if it had always been theirs. "Mom," my son said finally, his voice lower now. You'll be more comfortable somewhere else. This place is too much for you. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I realized he believed that. Or at least, he needed to believe it. That's kind of you to think about my comfort, I said softly. He nodded, relieved, mistaking my calm for agreement. That was his second mistake. I turned away from him before he could say anything else, not because I was hurt, but because I didn't want him to see that something had already shifted inside me. There's a moment when betrayal becomes too clear to ignore, when the confusion disappears. You stop asking why. You stop hoping for explanations. You simply see things as they are. And in that moment, everything becomes quiet. I walked slowly through the living room, my steps measured, my eyes tracing the familiar outlines of a life I had built piece by piece. The couch where my husband used to fall asleep with the evening news still playing softly in the background. The bookshelf filled with photo albums no one had opened in years. The small crack near the window frame we always meant to fix but never did. None of it looked different. And yet, it all felt distant. Like it already belonged to someone else. Behind me, I could hear my daughter-in-law speaking in a low voice. We should probably start with the upstairs. The master bedroom will need to be redone completely. The master bedroom. Not your father's room. Not their parents' room. Just another space to renovate. Another asset to upgrade. My son responded with a quiet agreement, his voice barely audible. Yeah, we'll have to see what stays and what goes. What stays? What goes? I paused at the doorway, my hand resting lightly against the wall. For a brief second, I closed my eyes. Not to hold on, but to remember clearly. Because memories, I've learned, are only painful when you pretend they still belong to the present. Once you accept they're part of the past, they lose their power to hurt you. They've already made plans, I thought. Not just to take the house, but to erase me from it. And suddenly, things began to make sense. The missed phone calls. The shorter visits. The way conversations would stop when I entered the room. I had told myself they were busy. That life moves fast when you're younger. That I shouldn't take it personally. But standing there, listening to them discuss renovations like I was already gone, I realized this hadn't happened overnight. This had been building for a long time. My daughter-in-law's voice grew sharper now, more confident. We should also look into refinancing once everything's in our name. The property value alone, I almost smiled. Once everything's in our name. That was the part they hadn't questioned. Not once. Not even for a second. They had assumed ownership long before they ever had it. I turned back toward them then, my expression calm, my posture steady. My son glanced up, as if suddenly remembering I was still there. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe. Or the faintest trace of guilt. But it passed quickly. Mom, he said, clearing his throat. Do you have somewhere to stay? Such a small question. Asked too late. Yes, I replied. He nodded again, relieved. Of course he was. As long as I had somewhere else to go, he didn't have to think too hard about where I had been pushed out from. But what he didn't understand, what neither of them understood, was that I hadn't just been preparing to leave. I had been preparing for this exact moment. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked past them, toward the staircase, my hand gliding lightly along the banister my husband had installed himself one summer afternoon nearly 20 years ago. I could still remember the way he stood back afterward, wiping his hands on a rag, smiling like he had built something far greater than a simple railing. This house will take care of you one day, he had said. At the time, I thought he meant comfort. Stability. I didn't realize he meant protection. Each step up the stairs felt steady, deliberate, not like someone being forced out, but like someone finishing something they had started long ago. Behind me, I could hear my daughter-in-law's voice again, a little sharper now. What is she doing? She whispered, not even bothering to lower her tone enough. she's probably just checking. If she forgot anything, my son replied. Forgot anything. I almost stopped there, right in the middle of the staircase. Not because the words hurt, but because of how small they made everything sound. 32 years reduced to something you might accidentally leave behind in a drawer. At the top of the stairs, I turned into the bedroom, the one my husband and I had shared for most of our lives. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a soft afternoon light that made everything look gentler than it really was. The bed was stripped bare. The closet empty. The dresser cleared. It looked like no one had ever lived there. I walked to the nightstand and opened the top drawer. Empty. Just as I had left it. But I didn't need anything from it anymore. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. Not heavy. Not painful. Just final. There's a difference between losing something and letting it go. One is taken from you. The other is a decision. And standing in that room, I knew exactly which one this was. Downstairs, I heard movement. The low murmur of voices. My daughter-in-law again, this time with a hint of excitement she couldn't quite hide. We should call the contractor this week. If we move fast, we can start renovations before the end of the month. Move fast. That seemed to be their plan for everything. Take. Replace. Move on. I closed the bedroom door behind me, not out of sentiment, but out of habit. Some things stay with you, even when everything else changes. Then I walked back down the stairs, slower this time, my gaze steady as I re-entered the living room. They both looked up. My son straightened slightly, as if expecting some kind of emotional reaction, maybe hesitation, maybe regret. My daughter-in-law simply watched me, her expression composed, but her eyes sharp. Waiting. Measuring. I'm ready, I said. The officer nodded and stepped forward, clipboard in hand, prepared to complete whatever process he believed this was. But before he could speak, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded envelope. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just a simple motion, practiced and precise. My son's eyes flickered to it immediately. What's that? He asked. I met his gaze, calm and steady. Something I should have shown you yesterday, I said. My son didn't take the envelope right away. He just stared at it, like it was something unfamiliar, something that didn't belong in this version of events he had already written in his mind. My daughter-in-law, on the other hand, leaned forward slightly, her curiosity sharper, more alert. She had always been quicker to sense when something didn't go according to plan. What is it? She asked, her tone controlled but edged with impatience. I didn't answer her. I held my son's gaze instead and extended the envelope just a little further. After a brief hesitation, he stepped closer and took it from my hand. His fingers brushed against mine, cold, distant, nothing like the small, warm hand I used to hold when crossing the street years ago. He unfolded the paper slowly. At first, his expression didn't change. His eyes moved across the lines, scanning, processing. Then he frowned. Just slightly. What is this? He asked. It's the closing statement, I said calmly. From the sale. The room shifted. Not physically, but in the way silence suddenly filled every corner at once. The officer stopped writing. My daughter-in-law straightened, her posture tightening. Sale, she repeated. Yes, I said. The house was sold yesterday morning. My son blinked, as if the words needed time to settle into something real. He looked back down at the document, reading again, this time slower. More carefully. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. That's not possible, my daughter-in-law said quickly, stepping closer to him. You can't just sell a property like this without what? I asked, my voice still even. Permission? She stopped. Just for a second. But it was enough. My son finally looked up at me, his face pale now, the confidence from earlier completely gone. Mom, when did you do this? A few weeks ago, I replied. The paperwork was finalized yesterday. Funds were transferred this morning. His grip tightened on the document. I could see the moment it hit him, not just that the house was gone, but that everything he had assumed about it was wrong. But this was, he started, then stopped himself. Your inheritance? I finished for him. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. It was written all over their faces. My daughter-in-law reached for the paper, scanning it quickly, her eyes moving faster now, searching for something, anything, that would undo what she was seeing. A developer, she said under her breath. You sold it to a developer? Yes. Her expression shifted again. Not confusion this time, but something closer to alarm. Because unlike my son, she understood exactly what that meant. This wasn't a transfer. This wasn't something they could challenge over dinner or pressure me into reversing. This was final. Legal. Done. You had no right, she began. I had every right, I said quietly, cutting through her words without raising my voice. The officer cleared his throat again, this time more uncertain. Ma'am, if the property has already been sold, then this eviction doesn't apply to me anymore, I said. You should probably contact the new owner. The silence that followed was different now. Not heavy. Not tense. Just empty. My son looked down at the paper again, then back at me, as if trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of him with the version of me he thought he understood. But that version no longer existed. My son opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he was trying to find the right version of reality to speak from, but none of them fit anymore. My daughter-in-law, however, wasn't the type to stay silent for long. She stepped forward, her composure cracking just enough to reveal what had been underneath all along. You did this on purpose, she said, her voice lower now, sharper. You knew we were planning to. She stopped herself, but it was too late. I tilted my head slightly. Planning what? She didn't answer. But she didn't need to. Because in that moment, everything they had tried to keep quiet, every whispered conversation behind closed doors, every careful step they thought I hadn't noticed, it all came rushing to the surface without a single word from me. My son ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the living room like he used to do when he was overwhelmed as a teenager. Only now, there was no one to steady him. Mom, why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice strained, almost desperate. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Not with anger. Not with disappointment. Just with clarity. Would it have changed anything? I asked. He hesitated. And that hesitation was all the answer I needed. Because if I had told him earlier, if I had sat him down and explained, asked, pleaded, hoped, he wouldn't have seen me differently. He would have just found another way to convince himself this was still his to take. You should have talked to me, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction now. I did, I replied. For years. That landed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But I saw it register, the slow, uncomfortable recognition that this moment hadn't come out of nowhere. That it was built on every ignored call, every dismissed concern, every time I had been made to feel like I was temporary. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms tightly. This isn't over, she said. There are legal options. We can challenge this. I gave a small nod. Of course you can try. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if my calm unsettled her more than any argument could have. Because there's something people don't expect when they think they've cornered you. They don't expect you to already be standing at the exit. The contract is clean, I added gently. Multiple offers. I chose the developer because they were the only ones who didn't ask me to rush. Funny, isn't it? My son looked up at that. What do you mean? I mean, I said, adjusting my bag on my shoulder, they were the only ones who treated me like I still had time. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was heavy with something else, realization, maybe. Or regret? The officer glanced between us, clearly unsure whether he was still needed. So, should I contact the buyer? He asked cautiously. Yes, I said. They'll want access soon. My daughter-in-law's expression shifted again, this time towards something close to panic. Access? When? I met her gaze, steady and unhurried. Soon, I repeated. And for the first time since they walked into that house. They weren't the ones in control anymore. My son took a step back, as if the ground beneath him had shifted and he needed distance just to stay upright. He looked around the living room, at the walls, the windows, the boxes by the door, as though trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through his fingers. But, where are we supposed to go? He asked, the question coming out quieter than anything he had said so far. It wasn't anger. It wasn't authority. It was uncertainty. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't have one, but because I wanted him to hear the weight of that question. To feel it the way I had felt it the moment I realized I no longer had a place in his life. My daughter-in-law let out a short, disbelieving breath. This is ridiculous, she said, shaking her head. You expect us to just walk away? After everything? After everything. I almost smiled at that. After everything? I repeated softly. You mean after you changed the locks? Filed the eviction? Decided where I should go without ever asking me? She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For once, she didn't have the right words ready. My son looked between us, his expression tightening. We didn't think it would come to this, he said. No, I replied. You didn't think at all. The words weren't harsh. They didn't need to be. Truth rarely does. He looked down at the paper still in his hands, the one that had rewritten everything he believed about this house, about me. You sold it to a developer, he muttered again, like saying it out loud might somehow change it. Yes. They're going to tear it down, he said. Most likely. That seemed to hit him harder than anything else. Not the money. Not the loss. But the idea that the house itself, the place he thought he owned, would soon be gone entirely. You didn't even try to keep it in the family, he asked, his voice almost accusing now, as if I had broken some unspoken rule. I met his eyes calmly. You stopped treating me like family a long time ago. Silence followed. Not the kind that waits for a response, but the kind that settles when there isn't one. My daughter-in-law turned away, pacing once, her heels striking the floor with sharp, uneven rhythm. We can fix this, she said suddenly, more to him than to me. We can talk to a lawyer, delay the transfer, maybe there's a clause. There isn't, I said gently. She stopped. Slowly turned back toward me. You sound very sure, she said. I am. Because I hadn't rushed this. I hadn't made a decision out of anger or fear. I had taken my time. Read every line. Asked every question. For the first time in a long time, I hadn't been reacting to them, I had been thinking for myself. The officer shifted again, clearly out of place now. Ma'am, if the new owner is taking possession soon, they may request that everyone vacate the property immediately. Everyone. That word hung in the air for a second longer than the others. My son looked up sharply. Everyone? I nodded. That includes you. And just like that, the house they thought they had taken from me was already gone for all of us. My daughter-in-law was the first to move. Not toward me, but toward her phone. Her fingers moved quickly, tapping, scrolling, dialing, like she could outpace what had already been set in motion. I'm calling someone, she said under her breath, her voice tight with urgency. There has to be a way to stop this. I watched her for a moment, not with satisfaction, but with recognition. I had seen that same urgency before. Years ago, when she first came into this family, it had looked like ambition. Determination. Now, stripped of its charm, it looked exactly like what it was, control slipping away. My son didn't follow her. He stayed where he was, still holding the paper, though his grip had loosened. You planned all of this, he said quietly, almost to himself. Yes, I answered. He looked up, searching my face again, but this time not for weakness. For answers. For how long? I considered the question. Not the exact date, not the paperwork or signatures, but the moment it truly began. The day I realized I had to, I said. He swallowed, nodding slowly, like he understood more than he wanted to admit. Because this wasn't just about the house. It never had been. It was about the moment a mother realizes she's no longer seen as one. Behind him, my daughter-in-law's voice grew sharper as she spoke into the phone. No, you don't understand, we just found out. The property was sold yesterday. Yes, yesterday. There has to be something we can file, some kind of hold. She stopped, listening. Her posture stiffened. What do you mean it's already recorded? I turned slightly, picking up my coat from the back of a chair. The fabric felt familiar in my hands, worn in the way only something truly yours can be. She's serious, my son said quietly, almost in disbelief, as if he needed to say it out loud to accept it. I've always been serious, I replied. He let out a slow breath, running both hands through his hair now, pacing again. But this time, there was no frustration in it, just the slow unraveling of certainty. We thought, he began, then stopped. I know what you thought, I said gently. That I would stay. That I would forgive. That I would accept whatever space they left for me, however small it became. That I would always choose them, no matter what they chose to do to me. My daughter-in-law lowered the phone slowly, her face pale now, the confidence from earlier completely gone. It's done, she said, almost whispering. The transfer's complete. There's nothing we can do. No one spoke after that. Because for the first time, there truly wasn't anything left to say. I walked toward the door, not rushed, not hesitant. Just steady. Each step felt lighter than the last, not because I was leaving something behind, but because I had already let it go. When I reached the doorway, I paused, not to look back, but to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Not boxes. Not furniture. Just myself. I'll give you one piece of advice, I said without turning around. Neither of them responded, but I knew they were listening. Next time you plan to take something from someone, I continued softly, make sure it actually belongs to you first. Then I stepped outside. The air outside felt different. Lighter, somehow. Not because anything around me had changed, the same street, the same quiet row of houses, the same late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement, but because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide where I belonged. Behind me, I could still hear movement inside the house. Raised voices now. Not loud enough to make out every word, but enough to recognize the shift. Confusion. Blame. The kind of tension that surfaces when a plan falls apart and there's no one left to control the outcome. I stepped down the front porch slowly, my hand brushing against the wooden railing my husband had painted himself years ago. It needed another coat. We had talked about that last spring, sitting right there with 2 cups of coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. Back then, everything had felt steady. Predictable in the best way. Now, it was something else entirely. A black sedan was already parked at the curb. Clean. Polished. Unfamiliar. I recognized it immediately, not because I had seen it before, but because I knew what it represented. Efficiency. Finality. The developer didn't waste time. The driver stepped out as I approached, offering a polite nod. Mrs. Carter, he asked. Yes, I replied. I'm here to take you to the office. They'd like to finalize a few remaining details in person. Of course they would. People who deal in decisions like this prefer everything to be clean, documented, complete. No loose ends. I glanced back at the house then. Not out of hesitation, but out of habit. The front door was still open. My son stood just inside, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring down at his phone, probably searching for something that could undo what had already been done. For a brief moment, I wondered if he would come out. Say something. Anything. He didn't. And that told me everything I needed to know. I turned away and walked toward the car. The driver opened the door for me, and I paused just long enough to adjust my coat, smoothing it down the way I always had before stepping out into the world. Some habits stay with you. Not because you have to, but because they remind you who you are. As I sat down, the leather seat cool beneath my hands, I allowed myself one final thought, not about the house, not about the money, not even about what I had lost. But about what I had finally stopped giving away. Respect. The car door closed softly, sealing off the noise behind me. The engine started, smooth and quiet, and as we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back again. Because some endings don't need witnesses. And some lessons don't need to be explained. The drive was quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind, not the kind that demands conversation, but the kind that gives you space to finally hear your own thoughts without interruption. The city moved past the window in slow, familiar patterns. Traffic lights. Storefronts. People walking with purpose, unaware of how quickly a life can shift in a single afternoon. I rested my hands in my lap, feeling the faint outline of the bank receipt still tucked inside my bag. Numbers. Transfers. Confirmations. Clean, precise, undeniable. For years, I had lived in a world where everything emotional felt complicated, where relationships blurred the lines between love and obligation. But this was simple. Ownership. Decision. Action. The driver glanced at me briefly through the rearview mirror. First time working with them? He asked politely. Yes, I said. He nodded, as if that explained everything. They move fast. But they're fair. Fair. I looked back out the window. That word used to mean something different to me. It used to live in conversations, in promises, in the quiet understanding between people who were supposed to care about each other. But somewhere along the way, I had learned that fairness isn't something you wait for. It's something you create, sometimes quietly, sometimes alone. We pulled into a modern office building just outside the downtown area. Glass walls. Clean lines. No history. No memories. Just business. The kind of place where decisions are made without emotion, and that, oddly enough, felt comforting. Inside, everything moved with quiet efficiency. A receptionist greeted me by name. Someone offered me water. Another person guided me into a conference room where a stack of documents was already prepared. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just the final steps of something that had already been decided. Mrs. Carter, a man in a navy suit said, extending his hand. I'm Daniel Hayes. We spoke on the phone. I shook his hand. Yes. We just need to finalize a few signatures and confirm the transfer details, he said, taking a seat across from me. Everything else has been processed. Of course it had. I sat down, smoothing the papers in front of me, scanning them not because I doubted them, but because I respected the process. Every line, every clause, every signature represented something I had taken back. Not just the house. Not just the money. Control. Funds have been deposited into your account as of this morning, he continued. You'll see the full amount reflected by the end of the day. I nodded once. No excitement. No relief. Just acknowledgement. Because this wasn't about gaining something. It was about no longer being in a position where everything could be taken. As I signed the final page, the pen moved steadily in my hand. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Just a clean, deliberate motion, like closing a door that had been left open for far too long. Congratulations, he said. I looked at the signature for a moment, then set the pen down. Not everything that ends needs to feel like a loss. The congratulations felt distant, like something meant for someone else. I gave a small nod, gathered my things, and stood up without lingering. There was nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to reconsider. Everything that needed to be said had already been written, clearly, legally, finally. As I stepped out of the building, the late afternoon light had softened into early evening. The air was cooler now, carrying that quiet shift between day and night. For a moment, I stood there, not moving, just letting it settle. No urgency. No pressure. No one waiting inside a house to tell me where I did or didn't belong. My phone rang. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Mom, my son's voice came through, strained, uneven, nothing like the controlled tone he had used earlier. We need to talk. I didn't respond right away. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted him to hear the silence. To feel it the way I had felt it so many times before, waiting on the other end of calls that never came. There's nothing left to talk about, I said calmly. That's not true, he said quickly. You didn't have to do this. We could have worked something out. Worked something out. I leaned lightly against the side of the building, watching as a few cars passed by, their headlights beginning to flicker on. You already worked it out, I replied. You filed the eviction. There was a pause. A longer one this time. That wasn't supposed to, he started, then stopped. It just got out of hand. No. It didn't. Things only get out of hand when no one is paying attention. And I had been paying attention for a long time. Mom, please, he said, his voice dropping now, softer, almost careful. Where are you going to stay? The same question. Asked again. But this time, it sounded different. Not out of concern, out of uncertainty. I've already arranged everything, I said. With who? He asked. That doesn't concern you. Another silence. He exhaled slowly, like he was trying to steady himself. We didn't think you'd go this far, he admitted. I know, I said. Because that was the truth. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected consequences. And they certainly hadn't expected me to move before they did. You could have just talked to me, he said again, quieter now. I closed my eyes for a brief second, not out of pain, but out of clarity. I did, I said. You just stopped listening. That was the part he couldn't argue with. Not because he didn't want to, but because somewhere, deep down, he knew it was true. I don't understand why you do this to your own family, he said finally. I opened my eyes again, looking out at the street in front of me, steady and unchanged. No, I said softly. You don't. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain it to him. I ended the call without saying goodbye. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left that required a closing. Some conversations don't end with words. They end with understanding. I slipped the phone back into my bag and stood there for a moment longer, watching the world move the way it always does, steady, indifferent, unchanged. By the quiet collapse of someone else's expectations. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trying to keep up with it. I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't holding anything together. I was simply standing on my own. A week later, I returned to the street. Not to reclaim anything. Not to confront anyone. Just to see it one last time, on my terms. The house was already surrounded by temporary fencing, bright orange against the fading paint of a place that no longer belonged to memory, only to process. A sign stood out front with the developer's logo, clean and impersonal. Future site of modern residences. No trace of what had been there before. I stayed on the sidewalk, hands resting lightly at my sides. No tears. No regret. Just observation. Because what I had lost wasn't the house. That had never been the hardest part. It was the illusion that it had still been a home. A truck pulled up, workers stepping out, voices casual, routine. To them, this was just another project. Another structure to remove, another foundation to lay. And I realized something then, something simple, but steady. They weren't destroying anything. They were clearing space. The past had already done its part. My son never called again after that day. Not because he didn't have questions. But because, for once, he had answers he didn't want to face. My daughter-in-law tried, once, left a message about misunderstandings and moving forward. I didn't return it. Not because I needed distance. But because I had finally learned the difference between forgiveness and access. You can let something go. Without letting it back in. I moved into a smaller place across town. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet home with wide windows and morning light that filled the rooms without asking permission. I bought a new table. Not large, not meant for hosting. Just enough for one cup of coffee, one plate, one person who no longer needed to wait for others to show up. And sometimes, in the early hours, when the world is still quiet, I sit there and think, not about what happened, but about what didn't. I didn't beg. I didn't break. I didn't stay where I was no longer respected. And that made all the difference. Because in the end, they thought they were taking something from me. A house. An inheritance. A place to belong. But what they never understood was this: they planned my eviction. I planned my exit.